There is a great deal more I want to say about this bill and how it affects the District of Columbia. It is with pleasure that I yield to my good friend, the whip, such time as he may desire.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, I want to join her in saying that there were some minuses in this bill. And the minuses in this bill historically have been, as it relates to the District of Columbia, that the Congress has treated the District of Columbia as its own possession as opposed to an independent political jurisdiction that has been granted home rule. And the Congress ought to honor that home rule. And as we urge democracies around the world, or dictatorships in the world, to honor the views of their people, the Congress of the United States ought to honor the wishes of the people of the District of Columbia. And I always lament when we put in these individual provisions. I also want to say to the gentlelady from the District of Columbia how outstanding a job she does representing this jurisdiction in which we have the capital of our country, the only capital of a free world country whose citizens do not have a representative in their parliament who has the authority and privilege of voting. It's a lamentable fact that Mrs. Norton, who is speaking to us today, this afternoon, does not have that vote. And all of us ought to recognize that's a blight on our democracy. But I congratulate her on representing the District of Columbia in such an extraordinarily positive fashion, even without the vote. And it would be awesome of what she could do in addition to that with the vote. And I rise as well to make a couple of comments, Mr. Speaker, about the business that is pending before this Congress. We have passed an omnibus appropriation bill. This bill that is on the desk here, 1,207 pages, reported out last night, conference report. I urged support of that bill, but it was not, of course, consistent with the pledges that were made to do appropriations bills discreetly, that is, one after another. Difficult to do that, unfortunately. It's the way we should do it, but we didn't do it this year, and we haven't done it in years past under Democratic and Republican leadership. But I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, that we have some critically unfinished business pending in the Congress of the United States. We passed a bill here through the House some days ago which provided for the extension of the payroll tax cut that we gave to 160 million Americans last year. Our economy is still not as robust as we want it to be, and the President of the United States has said, let's continue that tax cut for middle-income Americans. We have not done that yet. And unfortunately, the bill that we passed through the House had items in it that obviously the Senate did not agree with. The Majority Leader tried to put that bill on the floor for consideration by the Senate, and the Minority Leader objected to that consideration. So it has not moved. In addition to the middle-class tax cut, we must not leave Washington without providing for an extension of the unemployment insurance. This great nation, this wealthy nation, should not abandon those who cannot find work through no fault of their own. If we do not act, 1 million Americans may go off unemployment insurance and not have money to feed themselves, to assist in feeding their families, pay their housing bills, and continue to afford to look for work. In the month of February, another 2 million will find themselves similarly situated. Lastly, we must pass an extension of the compensation of doctors who are serving Medicare patients. That is critical to do so that we can assure medical treatment for our seniors. There's not a member of Congress who doesn't want to see that happen, or at least none who say they want to see it happen. So I want to join Mrs. Norton as we stand here today, as we are leaving for the weekend. But I also want to call the House's attention to a concern that I have. The Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, announced to us the schedule this afternoon and said that we would not be meeting today, later in the day, after our business, which is now concluded. We would not be meeting on Saturday or Sunday, and that we may come back on the 19th, which is Monday. Now, one of the things I was concerned about is that he said on the floor, it is difficult to predict if or when we need to return. Now, he meant by that that he wasn't sure when the Senate was going to act. I understand his meaning. But I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I hope the American people will demand that we return, and that they will demand that we act before we adjourn sine die, before we conclude this first session of the Congress. Yes, Christmas is coming, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, other celebrations, but there will be no celebration for those people who cannot find work and who believe that the support system that this country has extended to them will be ripped out from under them. So I am here on the floor to join my colleague in talking about the omnibus appropriation bill to say that I'm pleased that we passed it. It will keep our government operating. It has not yet passed, but hopefully in the next 48 hours the Senate will have acted, hopefully next 24 on the conference report, and we'll get ready to send it to the President. But I am very hopeful that all 435 members of this House and that all 100 members of the United States Senate are committed to the proposition that we will not leave this town, that we will not abandon our responsibilities to assure the adoption of the three measures which I have referenced. The middle-class tax cut, which will affect 160 million Americans. I frankly think we should pay for that with a slight surcharge, not a sacrifice, just an additional contribution by some of the best off in America. Not because of class warfare, but because they want, I'm sure, to help their fellow citizens who need help. Not leave here without making sure that that middle-class tax cut continues, that unemployment insurance is available, and that doctors will be compensated. So I thank the gentlelady for yielding for this comment. And in closing, let me say that I wear a yellow ribbon. There's a great song about tie a yellow ribbon round the great oak tree. We wear that yellow ribbon for the troops that have been overseas, defending freedom in harm's way. We wear that yellow ribbon to remind them of how pleased we are that so many of them are coming home. The President has met his commitment to end our participation in the war in Iraq and bringing our troops home. We welcome them home. We honor them for their service, and we pledge to them our continuing care for their needs resulting from their service. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding this time to call our attention to the important work that is yet to be done in this first session of this Congress. And I yield back.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Hoyer. It was a very special pleasure to yield to a man who is second in among our own Democrats here in the House. And I think that it was particularly appropriate as we close out this session for our Democratic whip, our Democratic leader, to come to the floor to remind us of unfinished business. So it was a great pleasure to be able, therefore, to give time to Mr. Hoyer, who speaks for us all, and I thank him for speaking not only to the nation's business, but to speaking to the business of the District of Columbia. He never neglects the city. He has been a great champion of the district and full freedom for the nation's capital. Mr. Hoyer essentially spoke about the unfinished business. I opened relieved at what the Democrats were able to accomplish in this conference report. When you consider that almost everything of great priority for us was under attack. So yes, we are relieved, but what Mr. Hoyer has reminded us about this evening is that there is unfinished business that should not allow Congress to go home to celebrate its own personal Christmas with a clear conscience until they deal with this part of the nation's business. The payroll tax that will go up unless we extended unemployment insurance for 6 million people. These would have been routine. These ingredients, the payroll tax, for example, that economists tell us are essential to keep the economy from collapsing because that tax is going to be instantly spent. And if that payroll tax goes up instead of staying out, there will be a full 1% decrease in the already shallow growth of the economy. Unemployment insurance does precisely the same thing. For every 4 people looking for a job, there's only 1 job available today. Who would want to deny unemployment insurance? And as for Medicare, we already have too many physicians unwilling to take Medicare patients. The last thing we want to do is to leave that situation so that so many of our seniors would have nobody to go to. Mr. Speaker, 4 residents were arrested this morning in front of the Longworth building to protest congressional action to keep the district from spending its own local funds as it sees fit, in this case, for abortion services for low-income women. No one asked these residents to do it. There was a picket line. I went to the Longworth there on Independence Avenue, joined the picket line, left, and then was informed that 4 people had decided to engage in civil disobedience in order to leave the Congress with the message that we will never go away quietly so long as you treat the residents of the District of Columbia as second-class citizens. These 4 joined 73, or is it 72, who were arrested the first time that the Congress attempted this very rider. They have been successful in this sense. While there is one rider, the abortion rider, there are no more. And yet there were attempts to put more riders, more attachments, at odds with what the residents of the District of Columbia themselves have enacted. And those were not added. There were riders that would have kept the district from using needle exchange programs, indispensable to eliminating the spread of HIV/AIDS. There were promise riders on the district's marriage equality law, and there was a promise rider to eliminate all of the district's gun safety laws. Because district residents did not go silently the last time, we have been able to beat back those riders. We are relieved that the federal government didn't shut down, because the district government would have shut down on Friday had the federal government shut down, although the District of Columbia is no part of this fight. The district's local budget was passed months ago. However, the Congress treats the district paternalistically and makes it bring its budget to people who know nothing about its budget and have contributed nothing to its budget. In order for the Congress, people from other districts, to sign off on the local budget of a city not their own. So because the District of Columbia budget was locked within one of the appropriations, and almost none of them had in fact been passed, the district faced a possible shutdown. I have had a bill here pending for many months to the effect that if the government shuts down, the district can continue to spend its own local funds. That bill has not passed. It is amazing to even contemplate the possibility that the local government would have been shut down over issues having nothing to do with the local government. Well, there is only one way to avoid that problem, and it is a way that we are making at least some progress on, and that is to give the city the right to pass its own budget and be done for it. We are pleased that there is some interest in this issue, especially the bill Mr. Issa of California has introduced to allow budget autonomy, a bill that mirrors my own in many ways, with, of course, the deference his bill gives to the Congress, but it would go a long way toward avoiding shutdowns, toward allowing the district, when it in fact passes its own budget timely and balanced, to go forward, to have its budget done before school opens, to avoid having to pay a premium on Wall Street because the Congress forces the city to bring its budget to the Congress, thereby creating uncertainty with those who hold our bonds. So there is a way, and it is a way that we will never give up until we get that way. May I ask how much time remains?
Lady has 3 minutes remaining.
So as the residents of the District of Columbia look at the national appropriation, they will see the National Conference report. They will have much to be grateful for, because the wholesale attack on everything from education to health care reform did not succeed. Yes, there were some extraordinary and important, very good things in the D.C. appropriation, even as the city is in anguish that the Congress would dictate to the city how it must spend its own local funding. So the city is justifiably angry that there was one rider, one amendment at odds with our own law forced upon us in the way of authoritarian governments. At the same time, other riders that would have been terribly destructive, we were able to fight off. And the funding was in fact salutary and mindful of the needs of the nation and of the city, especially the funding of the Homeland Security headquarters in Ward 8, a ward with a high unemployment rate, DC TAG, which is the bill that allows our children to go to state colleges around the country because we do not have a state university system. And we are especially appreciative, again, of the funding for HIV/AIDS to engage in education and prevention in a city that has a high AIDS rate. The Appropriation Committee has tried to overcome the partisanship of the 112th Congress. It did so to a fair extent on the General Conference report, and it certainly did so on our report, on our appropriation, the D.C. appropriation, notwithstanding the issues that we will continue to take with our appropriation until our appropriation is ours alone. Our appropriation, our money. My thanks to those who, in civil protest, civil disobedience, were arrested this morning because of the rider on the D.C. appropriation. And my thanks as well to the hunger strikers, who for the first time in the 210-year history of the District of Columbia made a very special sacrifice as D.C. residents to indicate how intolerable it is for 600,000 residents of the nation's capital to be treated as second-class citizens. Happy holiday to all members of the House. May we have a bipartisan year next year. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Monday next.
The House completed legislative work for the week, even though the Senate is staying in session into the weekend. Before leaving